With so much going on during the holidays, the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of time making complicated meals. Well, there is a healthy, simple solution. It comes in a jar. It's pasta sauce. Consumer reporter Marilyn Moore.
One of the pasta sauces in this video contains a coloring agent classified as a carcinogen under California law. Another has more sugar per serving than a glazed donut hole. A third puts olive oil on the label while the formula inside is built on soybean oil. All 8 are on American grocery shelves right now, bought every week by families who never read the back of the jar. But we did. We pulled the ingredient lists, checked the lab results, and found 5 alternatives that actually deliver what these labels only pretend to. Coming in at number 1 is Ragu Old World Style Traditional. This is the brand that practically invented the pasta sauce category for American families. It's been on shelves since 1937, and you probably grew up with it. Your parents might have too. That longevity is exactly what makes what's inside so hard to swallow. When food scientists analyzed the ingredient list, what stood out wasn't the tomatoes. It was what was hiding between them. Soybean oil instead of olive oil. Citric acid as a preservative that has no place in a recipe your grandmother would recognize. And added sugar high enough to push 1/2 cup serving past 6 grams before you account for the pasta underneath. For families managing blood sugar daily or parents giving this to children every weeknight, this is a quiet accumulation added to every meal you think you're keeping simple. The tomatoes are real, technically, but they're diluted by so much filler that the sauce is closer to a flavored condiment than a whole food ingredient. Consumer Reports tested Ragu Old World Style Traditional and found it scored lower for taste than sauces made with whole tomatoes, noting its sweeter profile and less fresh tomato flavor. Open a jar and hold it to the light. The color is vivid, the texture is thick, and none of that happened by accident. It happened by engineering. The jar is 24 ounces for around $2.50. What you're actually getting is engineered sweetness designed to make the flavor pop so you don't notice everything else that isn't there. Ragu's parent company, Mizcan, posted over $1 billion in revenue in the same year they kept this formula unchanged. They know exactly what's in it. They've simply decided you don't need to know. But if you think the name brand original is the problem, wait until you see what the so-called premium upgrade is doing to the same families. At number 2 is Prego Traditional Italian Sauce. Campbell's has marketed this as the more refined alternative to Ragu for decades, and it worked. The brand owns a significant share of the pasta sauce market, and its deeper red color and visibly thicker texture make it feel more serious, more artisanal, more like something that came from a real kitchen. That perception is manufactured. Prego's ingredient list leads with tomato puree, then quickly moves into sugar, listed plainly, which sounds more acceptable than corn syrup. It isn't. One serving contains 10 grams of sugar, and 4 of those grams are added. That is more than you'd find in a glazed donut hole. The soybean oil is back. The citric acid is back. The natural flavors designation is a catch-all that the FDA allows manufacturers to use for anything from actual herbs to laboratory-synthesized flavor compounds, and no further disclosure is required. Consumer advocacy groups have called for reform on this labeling loophole for years. The FDA has not acted. If you switched to Prego from Ragu, thinking you were making a healthier upgrade, you were handed a different label over the same core problem. Consumer Reports found Prego Traditional to be among the highest sodium options in the entire pasta sauce category, with 460 milligrams or more per half-cup serving, which is at least 20% of the recommended daily limit. The television ads show a grandmother stirring a pot. The facility that makes Prego Traditional does not resemble a grandmother's kitchen in any way that matters to your health. Millions of families pour it directly onto dinner without reading a single ingredient. The premium branding is doing enormous work to distract you from what's actually inside the can. Now, at number 3, here's where the deception gets more expensive. Classico tomato and basil is the brand people reach for when they want something that feels more Italian, more grown up, more worth the extra dollar. The glass jar, the old world-style label with serif fonts and rustic imagery. The name itself sounds like a recipe handed down through generations in a Tuscan village. Classico is owned by Kraft Heinz, one of the largest packaged food corporations on Earth. Look past the jar and into the ingredients. Water, tomato paste, diced tomatoes, then modified food starch, a thickener that creates the illusion of a slow-cooked reduction without any actual cooking time. Then you get dried garlic and dried basil, a distant shadow of the fresh herbs the label implies, followed by sugar, citric acid, and natural flavor. No olive oil. The word olive does not appear once in the ingredient list of a product whose entire visual identity implies the Mediterranean tradition. If you paid more for this jar because you believe the story on the outside, the inside is a straight betrayal of that trust. Kraft Heinz has faced multiple class action lawsuits over misleading ingredient and labeling claims across its product lines, including suits alleging that no artificial preservatives claims were deceptive when products contained synthetic citric acid. The formula has not changed. The glass jar stayed, and the olive oil never arrived. That jar runs around $3.50. You are paying for the glass and the aesthetic. The actual contents are closer to the $2 competition than anyone at Kraft Heinz wants to acknowledge. If a family brand hides that much behind an Italian-looking jar, surely the budget brands are at least honest about being budget, right? Wrong. Number 4 is Hunt's traditional pasta sauce, and this one runs into different territory because the specific danger shifts. Hunt's is the budget staple, with no pretense of premium and no glass jar or European imagery. The brand positions itself as honest value, and if the ingredients were genuinely simple, that might be a defensible position. They aren't. Hunt's pasta sauce contains high fructose corn syrup. Not just sugar, but the industrially processed form that metabolizes differently in the body and has been linked in peer-reviewed research to increased triglyceride levels and insulin resistance when consumed regularly over time. For households where this goes on the table 4 or 5 nights a week, the frequency is the actual danger. The brand also relies on modified cornstarch and citric acid alongside its HFCS. Dried herbs replace fresh ones at every step. Tomato concentrate replaces whole tomatoes. What you're getting is a product engineered to deliver maximum shelf stability at minimum ingredient cost, with flavor chemistry doing the work that real ingredients would otherwise do. 1/2 cup clocks in at over 400 milligrams of sodium. For anyone pouring this onto dinner daily, you're stacking significant sodium on top of a sweetener system that quietly works against you. The jar costs around $1.79. That price makes it feel like a wise family decision. The value calculation changes entirely when you account for what you're actually buying jar after jar, week after week, over years of dinners. Think you've been making the smart choice by reaching for a store-brand version instead? Wait until you see what that actually means. This next one might surprise you. Walmart's Great Value Traditional Pasta Sauce is the private label option tens of millions of households reach for every single week, at under $1.50 per jar. The ingredient list reads like the greatest hits of everything this video has already uncovered. Tomato puree, high fructose corn syrup, modified food starch, dried onion, dried garlic, soybean oil, natural flavors, citric acid. Nutritionally, it is nearly indistinguishable from brands sold at 3 times the price. Consumer Reports tested Great Value marinara and found it contained 490 milligrams of sodium per half-cup serving, one of the highest in the entire category. The cheapest jar on the shelf is carrying the same risks as the ones wrapped in Italian imagery. You thought you were being smart with your grocery budget. The label let you believe that. The ingredients did not play along. If this next brand sounds familiar, it should, because the betrayal runs even deeper when the jar itself is the selling point. Coming in at number 6 is Bertolli tomato and basil. This one stings more than the previous entries because Bertolli spent decades building its reputation as the olive oil brand. The authentic Italian kitchen standard, the one you reach for when you want cooking that feels like it came from a family in Tuscany. The pasta sauce line borrowed that identity directly and put it on every jar. The label says olive oil. The ingredient list says soybean oil, with olive oil listed significantly further down, meaning by FDA labeling rules, there is likely more soybean oil than olive oil by volume. This is entirely legal. The FDA allows a label to say, made with olive oil, even if olive oil is a minor component of the total fat content. Bertolli's branding leans harder into Italian heritage than almost any other brand on this list. That imagery is doing a job the ingredient list cannot do honestly. The sauce also contains added sugar, modified cornstarch, and natural flavors. The same invisible catch-all that appears in every product in this countdown. And here's the kicker. Eat This Not That ranked Bertolli tomato and basil as having 11 grams of sugar per serving, the highest of any sauce in their analysis. Decades of olive oil marketing on the front, soybean oil in the formula, and more sugar than almost anything else on the shelf. At around $4 per jar, you're paying a meaningful premium for a story the product can't back up. But a lot of people moved to this next brand thinking they were finally getting away from all of this. They weren't. At number 7, we have Barilla tomato and basil sauce. Barilla lines the center aisle of virtually every American grocery store, often stacked beside its own pasta. And the brand has positioned itself as the everyday Italian choice for families who care a little more. The reality is that Barilla's sauce contains sugar listed early in the ingredients, modified cornstarch, soybean oil, and spices as an undefined catch-all that requires no further FDA disclosure. The brand markets the sauce as a natural pairing for its own pasta line, creating a bundled purchase that generates enormous retail revenue. What it does not generate is a meaningful ingredient upgrade from what we've already exposed. Barilla's parent company posted over $3 billion in revenue in its most recent reporting year. They have the resources to source cleaner ingredients. They've calculated that the current formula sustains sales volume without the added cost. What you believe is a step up from the cheap brands is, in ingredient terms, a lateral move. But the final brand on this list has been on American shelves even longer, which means if it's been your brand, the exposure goes back even further. Number 8 is Francesco Rinaldi Traditional. Fewer Americans recognize the name compared to Ragu or Prego, but it holds a quietly loyal following among home cooks who found it at a regional chain and never switched. That loyalty is exactly what makes this one matter. Francesco Rinaldi's ingredient list features high fructose corn syrup, modified food starch, soybean oil, and buried at the bottom where most people stop reading, caramel color. The compound 4-MEI, a byproduct formed during caramelization manufacturing, was classified by California's Proposition 65 as a carcinogen in 2012. The Center for Science in the Public Interest petitioned the FDA to ban ammonia-produced caramel colorings back in 2011, warning they may be causing thousands of cancers. Major national soda brands reformulated under that regulatory pressure. But here's what makes Francesco Rinaldi different from the other brands in the countdown. The danger isn't primarily the sweetener or the oil substitute. It's a coloring agent the product doesn't even need except to make the sauce look richer in the jar. The darkness in the jar isn't depth of flavor. It's a manufacturing byproduct that California classified as cancer-causing. Francesco Rinaldi is not the most famous brand on this list, and that's the problem. It got to hide in plain sight the longest, in the kitchens of families who had no particular reason to look it up. 3 generations of loyalty and 3 generations of caramel color in the bowl. Now you know. The good news is that what comes next is worth the price difference, and it smells and tastes like the real thing. The others were only pretending to be. If this kind of research is helping you shop smarter, hit subscribe. It's free, and it means these exposés come straight to you every week. 8 brands investigated, 8 problems exposed. But the reason you watched this far wasn't just to know what to avoid. You need to know what to buy instead. 5 brands ahead that actually hold up under the same scrutiny, starting with the one that charges $10 a jar and earns every cent of it. The first brand worth your money is Ragu's homemade marinara sauce. If you've seen it at the store and hesitated because of the price, usually between $8 and $10 per jar, the ingredient list is the entire explanation for that number. Ragu's contains tomatoes, olive oil, onions, garlic, fresh basil, salt, and black pepper. That is everything. The full list. 7 ingredients, each one something a person with a kitchen and 20 minutes could assemble from a grocery run. The tomatoes are crushed whole plum tomatoes. The oil is pure olive oil, not a blend, not a secondary ingredient buried beneath a cheaper fat. The sauce has the texture and color of something actually cooked down over time, because the recipe doesn't rely on thickeners to manufacture that impression. Consumer Reports consistently rates Ragu's at the top tier for clean ingredients and taste, and the Center for Science in the Public Interest named it a Best Bite for both nutrition and flavor. For anyone who has been using store-brand sauce for years and wondering why homemade always tastes different, Ragu's is the closest shelf-stable answer to that question. It behaves differently in a hot pan. It reduces quickly. It browns at the edges the way real tomatoes do, because there's nothing padding out the water content. The price looks steep until you realize you're paying for actual food, prepared the way a real recipe works, with nothing added to extend shelf life or simulate flavor that isn't there. But Ragu's is not the only jar that passes the test, And the next option proves the price can come down without the quality following it. The second option worth serious consideration is Victoria Fine Foods marinara sauce, and the difference here starts before you even taste it. Open the jar and smell it. There's a sharp, clean tomato scent that hits immediately, and it is nothing like the muted sweetness that comes off the engineered brands. That smell is the difference between tomatoes that were grown to taste like something and tomatoes that were grown to survive a supply chain. Victoria is less widely distributed than Ragu's, but available at Whole Foods, Costco, and online retailers, and it holds up under identical scrutiny. Whole peeled tomatoes, olive oil, onions, salt, garlic, basil, black pepper. Victoria's tomatoes are cultivated in a San Marzano style in New Jersey, which gives the sauce an acidity and brightness you can taste in the first bite compared to the flattened, artificially sweetened flavor of everything in the countdown. The Center for Science in the Public Interest highlighted Victoria's low-sodium line as a standout, calling it one of the best options for both sodium levels and taste. At around $7 to $8 per jar, it sits in the same range as Ragu's with a genuinely comparable experience. The domestic sourcing means a shorter supply chain, fewer handling points, and more traceability about what happened in the field before harvest. That chain of custody has real implications for what ends up in the bowl. However, the one thing neither Ragu's nor Victoria can give you is a verifiable Italian origin. If the label says Italian and you actually want it to mean something, the next brand is the only one that backs it up. The third brand that holds up is DeLallo Italian Pomodoro Pasta Sauce. And this is where the Classico buyers need to pay attention. If you were buying Classico because the label made it feel Italian, DeLallo is what you were actually looking for. The difference is verifiable. DeLallo's marinara uses Italian crushed tomatoes that carry DOP traceability, a designation that certifies both geographic origin and production method under European regulatory standards. A generic tomatoes declaration on a mass-market jar carries none of that verification. Italian crushed tomatoes, sunflower oil, garlic, basil, onion, salt, black pepper. The oil here is sunflower rather than olive, worth noting if olive oil matters to you for health or culinary reasons, in which case Ragu's or Victoria are the better fit. But DeLallo's transparency about sourcing and its direct import relationships with Italian producers put it in a different category than anything in the countdown. The flavor profile is bright and properly acidic, the way well-grown Italian tomatoes taste when nothing has been added to soften or sweeten them. It runs around $6 to $7 per jar at specialty retailers and online. That is the honest version of what Classico's label was trying to imply. But what if you don't care about Italian origins at all, and you just want the cleanest possible formula? The next brand takes it further than anyone. The fourth option is Cucina Antica Tomato Basil Sauce. The entire ingredient list is 6 items: San Marzano tomatoes, olive oil, fresh basil, garlic, sea salt, and that's it. Compare that to the 12-plus item lists behind every brand in the countdown, and the contrast tells the whole story. San Marzano tomatoes carry enough natural sweetness that a properly made sauce doesn't need added sugar to round the flavor. Slow-cooked tomatoes with real olive oil develop body on their own, which is why you'll never find modified starch anywhere near this jar. The sauce is notably lower in sodium than every product on the avoid list, a meaningful difference for anyone cooking with it across the week. The flavor is more restrained than Ragu's, less immediate richness because nothing has been added to push the sweetness or amplify the body artificially. What you taste instead is the actual character of the tomato. Bright, clean, and faintly acidic in a way that takes a meal or two to recalibrate to if you've been eating sweetened commercial sauce for years. It runs around $7 per jar and is available at Whole Foods and online retailers. Cucina Antica earns its shelf space based purely on what is inside the jar, which is exactly how every brand in this category should work, but almost none of them do. However, every recommendation so far shares one limitation. You might not be able to find them at your regular grocery store. The final brand solves that problem. The fifth and final recommendation is Muir Glen Organic Pasta Sauce. This is the most widely available clean option on this list, and that's the whole reason it's here. Muir Glen is distributed through mainstream chains, warehouse clubs, and major online platforms. It carries USDA organic certification, meaning the tomatoes were grown without synthetic pesticides, and the formulation legally excludes the artificial preservatives, thickeners, and flavor compounds that showed up in every brand in the countdown. Organic tomatoes, organic onions, organic olive oil, sea salt, organic garlic, organic basil, Organic spices. The organic spices designation is slightly less specific than naming each one individually, and that distinction is worth noting. But it is a different standard entirely from natural flavors, which is the industry catch-all used to conceal proprietary flavor chemistry from the people eating it. Muir Glen has maintained third-party organic certification for over a decade. For households where Ragu's or Victoria aren't stocked locally, this is the clean option available at most mainstream stores for around $5 to $6 that you can feel good about pouring at dinner. Here is the pattern that connects everything in this video. Every brand in the countdown spent more on the outside of the jar than on what went inside it. Ragu engineered sweetness to mask filler. Classico bought a glass jar and Italian fonts. Bertolli borrowed the olive oil name and filled the formula with soybean oil. The grocery aisle is designed to reward that strategy because the label faces out and the ingredient list faces in. And the companies making these products understood decades ago that most families never turn the jar around. You now know how to read a pasta sauce label in 10 seconds. Check the ingredient list, not the front. Look for whole tomatoes first, not tomato puree. Look for named fats, not natural flavors. That skill does not expire when you leave the pasta aisle. It works on salad dressings, bread, cereal, soup, and every other product sitting on your shelf right now. The jar is just where it starts. If this kind of investigation matters to how you feed your family, subscribe. We pull apart the ingredient lists, the sourcing, and the marketing on the products Americans buy every week, and we tell you what is actually inside them. Because next week, we are opening the bread aisle. 12 of the most popular sandwich breads in America, and what we found hiding in the flour will make this pasta sauce countdown look tame. Only 2 brands passed. That investigation drops next week.